We're live.
Oh, wow. Well, people are jumping in. Oh, it's good. Well, we'll start in a few minutes just because there wasn't much of a break between the previous session and this one. Just wait and see if we get some more people jumping in. Looks like it may have stabilized already. Oops, sorry. Clock's wrong. What do you think, Willem? It looks like it may have. Should we wait just a minute?
I think give it one more minute, and then I think we'll be good to go.
Yeah, otherwise they'll miss the poll.
It's true.
Oh, there's a couple more. We'll start in just a minute, folks. Okay. Okay. Well, it looks like it's stabilized, so maybe I'll
Sounds good.
start. Yeah, I think I'll get started. Okay, welcome all. Plenary 6. All the brave souls have made it to the end of the day, a long day with lots of information. But in putting this all together, we've had sessions, I've mentioned a couple times, that really wanted to open up the discussion to beyond just the analytics and the methodologies and the applications, but to think about some of the processes around the ability to use the data and to apply it. And so we've had sessions on data governance and management, and we had a good plenary this afternoon about insights into data management and hiring staff and so forth. But I thought it'd be nice to round things out with a couple initiatives that are sort of relate to each other in the sense that they're trying to set up a framework for sharing information, for developing specifications, developing standardized approaches so that the whole industry as a whole can benefit more and more from the ability to use data and to share applications that people make with the data. And this sort of came from a realization over the years. I've gone to lots of conferences, as I mentioned. I monitoring the development and use of ITS data, and realized there was a bit of a frustration because if you actually are interested in data applications and you go to a conference, it's really hard to go home and then try to figure out how to start, develop those applications. So I had a quick polling question that gets things rolling and to wake people up. Willem, if you could put up the polling question. So how do you discover pertinent data applications from another transit agency? I first had put, how do you discover cool data applications, but I thought just pertinent maybe less outrageous. So you can take a look there. We'll just take a quick poll of 60 seconds of where do you get the new applications or using data. So word of mouth, conference with PowerPoints, consultant suggestions, vendor modules development, web search, other. I should.
Getting there, still trickling up.
Good. Well, and we've a couple new participants have been trickling in as well. It's good. We've got a good turnout for the end of the day.
And panelists can vote too. Don't forget.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Is it slowing down?
Getting there. This is clearly the engaged group.
That's probably okay, I think. Aha. Well, that is exactly the point. John Levin and I have talked about this many times. You go to a conference and you see something cool somebody else has developed. And if you're lucky, you get the PDF of their PowerPoint. And what do you do with that? Which led John to develop, and many of you probably know this, the TIDES initiative, which was trying to set up a standardized framework for sharing data and applications. And I was strongly supporting this, and John put together, with support from a bunch of us, TCRP problem statement that took a couple of tries, but was funded, and this will lead to our first presentation, which is the TCRP Project G-18 on the improving access and management of transit ITS data. And we have Catherine Vanderwaart, who's the chair of the technical committee, and Cecilia Viggiano, who's the principal investigator for the team that's doing the study. So maybe I'll pass it to Catherine if you wanted to start off the conversation, and then we can pass it to Cecilia.
And also it happens that one of our other panelists, David Porter, is on the panel, the TCRP panel with me.
Absolutely.
As well as you are also, and John Levin, who you mentioned, who I know is here at the conference.
Right.
So a lot of familiar faces in that group. So thanks for having us. I will just talk a little bit briefly about the project scope, and then I'll turn it over to Cecilia to talk about the meat of the work that she and her team have been doing about the use cases and the benefits, and sort of the overall project, and how, most importantly, I think, how people who are here watching this session can get involved with the work. So the panel put together a RFP, as that's just the process for TCRP. And what we were asking for is a common practical approach to storing, accessing, and managing fixed route transit ITS data. We kept the scope to the three big sources that we've heard a lot of discussion about over the last couple of days: AVL, APC, and AFC, recognizing that potentially something like this could expand in the future, but really focusing on those to start, and to really look at what all the challenges agencies are having with access and quality, integration, adapting other people's work, matching the data to the schedule, which sounds like a simple thing and often very much isn't, and to really think about, we often bring up the example of what GTFS did for schedule data and the way it transformed the analysis that has been possible in the applications that vendors have developed, really coming out of that, and what sort of transformative uses and more common tools are could be possible with a more unified approach to these other data sources, recognizing the widely varying needs of transit agencies, different staff, different service types, that there are a lot of challenges in doing that, but that we wanted a way to really enable agencies to collaborate more, to exchange reports and tools and techniques, and develop new systems and share with each other, based on this work. So the audience is primarily transit agencies in North America. I know there is some standards and specification work going on elsewhere that I know the team has looked at, but the focus, given that it's TCRP, is North American transit agencies. And also, of course, you have to involve vendors and other stakeholders like researchers, because they're the ones often generating the data or consuming the data, and focused on archived historical data, but knowing that as soon as you get something really cool built with historical data, people say, well, how quickly can I get that? And so we would want to be building towards as close as real time as we could in the future. The project, the scope that we put out, also has requirements in there for 2 sets of supporting tools, one for data transfer to help agencies figure out how they would get their data into these formats, and also validation tools about how agencies would be able to start ensuring data quality and do some of the basic calculations that most people want to, if you have ons and offs, you're going to be wanting to calculate load, some of those basic things. So we put out the RFP, and we were delighted with the team that we ended up with EBP and Foursquare and IBI, and Cecilia is PI. So I will turn it over to her to talk about the work that her team has been doing.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. So I'm going to kind of give a quick overview of what we've done so far. So we've completed our literature and information review, and we've also just completed our interviews as of about last week. So we're still kind of synthesizing those and processing them, but I wanted to just kind of go over some initial findings. So on the next slide, we kind of talking to transit agencies and also reviewing all of the literature out there. We found, unsurprisingly, that transit ITS data is used for all kinds of different processes within transit agencies. So everything from using, ridership information to update service planning. A lot of transit agencies are developing different dashboards, either for internal or external purposes, where they come up with some performance monitoring metrics based on their ITS data. There's a lot of, with AVL data, there's a lot of runtime type analysis that feeds into scheduling and operations decisions. To some extent, things like ridership monitoring feed into asset management and financial planning decisions as well. Certainly, the vehicle location information is a big part of customer information. And that's where, you get to some of these more real-time applications, but there's also an interest in kind of feeding crowding information into that as well, especially with the pandemic. And then, all of this data is also fundamental to reporting. So, a lot of transit agencies use it for their Ntd reporting, for example. And so there are a ton of different use cases. They fit into departments throughout transit agencies. So it's not really just one type of person at a transit agency using this data. So our general takeaway here is that the structure that we develop needs to suit a lot of different applications. So then on the next slide, the other thing we've been gathering information about is kind of, why bother with the data structure? And I think we were pretty convinced, but it's always good to think about what the point of this is. And so I think one thing is that currently every transit agency is kind of having to work on their own in terms of developing all of these supporting materials for their data sets. So data dictionaries and documentation, any kinds of privacy protocols they use, especially for fare card data, all kinds of different validation processes for different data sets. And, you know, the idea is that if we can develop a common structure, a lot of these tools can actually be shared. And certainly what we continue to see with GTFS is that this, the creation of the data standard led to a lot of different open source tools that extend beyond just kind of the customer information piece, but to a lot of other types of tools that can kind of piggyback on having a standard data format to feed those tools. And the other thing that we've found is that kind of in terms of potential data sharing, but also in terms of just incentivizing third parties, whether that's researchers or consultants or other private sector participants to create tools that can be useful for transit agencies, having a standard format kind of makes those tools potentially more valuable. And so in general, what we're kind of crafting the narrative around is that this actually can ultimately help transit agencies do their jobs more efficiently, and hopefully that translates to better agency performance and cost savings and streamlining. So I think being able to voice these benefits is pretty critical to ultimately incentivizing transit agencies to adopt the data structure that we develop as part of this process. So then the next slide, getting into our approach. So the next slide shows our timeline. So as I mentioned, we've done our information review. We're just wrapping up our interviews. So we're moving into the kind of approach development phase, and then this fall we'll be completing our interim report and having our meeting with the panel. And we also plan to have an approach workshop, so where we kind of present some of our planned approach and get feedback from a variety of practitioners. And that will kind of set the stage for phase 2 of the work, which will be happening primarily throughout all of 2021, where we develop the actual data structure and then requirements for the 2 tools that Catherine mentioned, the data transfer tool and the validation tool, and ultimately get to our final deliverables by the time the project wraps up in February of 2022. So you can see that the interviews were kind of the first step for input. So we talked to 20 different organizations, which were a combination of transit agencies, vendors, and other stakeholders, so researchers, people who have kind of already been working on transit ITS standards. That was our kind of first stage input. Then the workshop will be another opportunity for input. And then we do have a validation phase or validation task in phase 2, where we'll work with a small group of practitioners to actually test out what we've developed. So to talk a little bit more about the workshop, because we'd like to get people involved, and I'm sure there are a lot of people listening right now who would be great workshop participants. So our goals are report on what we found so far. So right now I'll give a really small taste of that, but once we've kind of digested things a little bit more and talked to the panel about our phase 1 findings, we'll be able to really report those out in more detail. And then the key thing is to really get feedback on our approach. So we plan to be presenting kind of our guiding principles for our approach to the data structure. We think it's important to think about what kinds of analysis that data structure will enable. And then we also want to talk about a little bit more in detail about what our scope is for these data transfer and validation tools. How are we defining those tools, and what kinds of things should they be doing? And then, of course, just kind of presenting in a little more detail what we're doing in phase 2. And yeah, we would like input from transit agency staff who use this kind of data. We want input from the vendors as well, and then of course researchers and other people who are kind of working in this area of standards development. And so I've put my email up here, so it'll be on the last slide as well. So if you're interested, just let me know. Then the next slide. So I just kind of, as I mentioned, we're just kind of digesting the information that we've collected, but I did want to give a taste of what we've kind of found so far in terms of the types of issues that are critical to the development of the data structure, and kind of the input that we've gotten so far from the people we've talked to. And there are kind of three factors that have come up again and again in our interviews and in our literature review as well. So one is kind of the flexibility of a data standard or structure. The other one is the extensibility of that structure, and then the final one is kind of like the granularity of the data and how the data structure sort of enforces, or what level of granularity the data structure enforces. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've kind of heard so far on these potential guiding principles. So flexibility. So, you know, we know that transit agencies vary in terms of their needs and capacity. So there are small transit agencies that maybe have one person who does data management, and there are bigger agencies that have a whole team. And then even if you kind of pick a couple of pretty similar seeming transit agencies of similar size, similar staff capabilities, you still end up with a ton of variation because their ITS systems might be from different vendors, they're different age, they some of them collect data, some AVL systems collect data at a stop, some of them collect heartbeat data. There's just tons of variation. And so that kind of begs this question of how flexible should the data structure be? And I think we've kind of gotten different opinions on that, but a lot of it has kind of coalesced around the idea that you need to have some required fields, but some optional fields to kind of account for the variation. And as I said, this isn't like this isn't a decision we've made already, but this is kind of our observations so far. And I think if we have a polling question related to this, I believe, to get some input right now. So basically about what our audience thinks the right strategy is to account for this diversity in terms of both the transit agency needs and also the kinds of data that they collect.
Just give it a few seconds for votes to trickle in. All right, just a few more seconds. I think there's a pretty clear result, though. We'll see that in a second. All right.
Okay, I mean, I may have biased the results by saying what we were thinking, but 81% think a mixture is good. I will say I think there are arguments for the other two as well, but I think given the state of data at transit agencies, it would be very challenging to come up with something with 100% required fields. All right, so next kind of principle that people have been talking to us about is extensibility. So one thing is that in general, it seems like most transit agencies are saying that they're using data more and more, and as each year passes, the applications that they have found for their ITS data are increasing. And so and then there's also kind of an evolution in terms of what data they're collecting. There are always new ways to collect fares, new modes. People have talked to us about kind of an potential increase in on-demand services and the kind of data that is collected from those services, which is different from fixed route transit data. So all of this kind of points to a need for a data structure that can evolve, and that there could potentially even be kind of like modules that build onto a core data structure. And so this is kind of another thing that we're keeping in mind is how do we set up a data structure that can evolve, and what kinds of, is there a governance group or a process that we can set up in terms of allowing that evolution over time, sort of similar to what GTFS has in terms of being able to change over time. And then the third principle is this issue of granularity. So, some people we talk to want data in the most granular and raw form that is possible. And that kind of, especially for researchers, that's often critical to kind of understanding the weird nuances in the data. But a lot of transit agencies also do get some cleaned data. Sometimes the vendors pre-clean some data. And so this is another kind of challenge that that we need to deal with. And ultimately, people do want clean data, and in some cases also aggregated data to answer certain questions. And so this is kind of where these cleaning and validation tools could be important, and then also even kind of an analyst toolkit that helps with some of the common aggregation processes that every transit agency or most transit agencies require to get from a very granular data set to the aggregated data that can answer the questions they're looking to answer.
Cecilia, there are a lot of questions, so maybe if you can wrap up pretty quickly, please.
Sure. So I think this is my last slide, so I will get to the main thing here is that, whatever data structure we develop, we feel like the measure of success is in the adoption, but there are obviously a lot of challenges to encouraging adoption of a new structure, because it takes time and it takes effort to coerce your data into a new structure. So here we kind of think that minimizing the effort, and then also kind of highlighting or identifying tangible benefits that are associated with adopting the data structure are critical. So then I think on the last slide, I just have my email one more time and another plug for the upcoming workshop.
Great, thank you very much. There's actually quite a few questions about adoption and various perspectives on that, but I just in the interest of being fair to the other two speakers, I'm going to hold the questions till the end. David, perhaps you could share your screen now. Thank you. Are you unmuted? We see your screen.
All right. Can you hear
there we
me
go.
now?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Excellent. Good afternoon. My name is David Porter. I'm a professor of industrial engineering at Oregon State University. I'd like to thank the conference organizers for the opportunity to present our project titled GTFS-ride, a unifying standard for fixed route ridership data. So I would like to start by introducing my collaborators, Matthew Barnes and Sarah Hackett from the Oregon Department of Transportation, my grad students, Sylvan Hoover and Austin Cost from Oregon State University, and Thomas Gregg, Jay Ward, and Chris Berry from Trillium Solutions. We started this project, what's going on here? Not advancing. Oh, there it is. Okay. We started this project back in 2016. At the start of the project, we conducted an online questionnaire to gain a better understanding of the state of the practice regarding data collection, storage, and use of ridership data in particular. We received 53 responses, 47 were from Oregon agencies. We also received responses from agencies in Virginia, Nevada, California, and Washington. And we had one international respondent, which was Transport of London. I was going through the list of attendees, and I would be surprised if maybe some of you did not participate in our survey. We collected obviously a lot of information about this aspect of data, but two salient results that we were able to identify were that the collection approaches and representation of ridership data vary widely across agencies, and also that the majority of agencies that we interviewed operate custom and or internally developed systems for the collection, storing, and analyzing of the ridership data. In follow-up conversations that we've had with other stakeholders, as well as with other transit agencies in Oregon and outside of Oregon, we feel that the landscape of ridership data that we see in Oregon is very representative of other states in the US. Now equipped with the knowledge that we gained with that questionnaire, we set out to develop a standard for fixed route ridership data. This standard, which was first released in September of 2017, is called GTFS-ride. And as the name indicates, it's an extension of GTFS, sorry. We also developed the foundation for a set of software tools to support GTFS-ride so that transit agencies could start using it. And a big portion of our project has been the dissemination and promotion of GTFS-ride so that more agencies are willing to adopt it. Ultimately, we would like GTFS-ride to facilitate an environment where the availability of high quality and consistent ridership data is the norm. And we feel that that would be beneficial for a lot of stakeholders, including state DOTs, academic researchers, as well as individual transit agencies. For those of you that are unfamiliar with GTFS-ride, we tried to make it as flexible as possible. I guess to that little poll that Cecilia conducted, I think that was on point, so that transit agencies of any size and technology readiness could benefit from it. So to that end, GTFS is composed of 5 files. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you see borderline.txt and ridership.txt. Borderline is really intended for those agencies that employ automatic passenger counting technology, so they have the lowest aggregation of data available, whereas ridership.txt is appropriate for agencies of any size and technological capabilities. As you can see also, ridership.txt accommodates any level of aggregation of the ridership data. The file right in the middle, feedinfo.txt, is the only required file, and it is used by agencies to indicate which files contain ridership data. And the last 2 files on the right-hand side of the slide, ridertrip.txt, is intended for agencies that have or use AFC technology, and trip-capacity.txt was added so that agencies could perform utilization analysis when paired with ridership data. This is just to illustrate, the main elements of GTFS-ride. So on top of developing the standard, we also wanted to add some supporting elements. We have a GTFS-ride change process, very similar to that used in GTFS. So we do quarterly reviews, and any comments or suggestions that we deem appropriate are incorporated into the standard. We also have a GTFS-ride Google group and a GTFS-ride wiki, which I'll show later in the presentation. And as I mentioned before, we develop a foundation of software tools, which include a feed validator and something that we dubbed Web Hub, where agencies can start editing some of their feeds and do basic visualization with the data. In terms of the potential benefits that we anticipate agencies and other stakeholders can gain from using GTFS-ride. Number one would be better informed analysis and decisions. That includes, for example, analyzing demand trends, optimizing routes, determining where to increase or decrease service, as well as improving amenities at bus stops. Also improving the transparency and public perception. As we all know, transit planners use ridership data on a consistent basis to make presentations or develop reports to show why they're proposing a certain change. The third one must be pretty self-explanatory. We really want to change kind of the landscape in terms of how agencies use systems to collect ridership data. So avoiding inefficiencies and preventing the reinvention of the wheel every time they want to create a system is important for us. Reducing the friction in data sharing and use from lack of standardization is important as well. We found in conversations with some agencies that sometimes are reluctant to share ridership data because they have concerns about their accuracy. And so I think having a consistent standard will ease that concern. And finally, ease the incorporation and upgrade of new technologies and information systems will be another benefit. In terms of future direction of our project, as I said, right now we're in phase 3. Thanks to funding from the statewide transportation improvement fund in Oregon. We're currently doing outreach to partner with a subset of transit agencies to do a full implementation of GTFS-ride over the next 6 to 8 months. And we're collaborating with them so that we can also interface with our CAT AVL system vendors. One of our goals in this project is to develop a software tool that can intake APC data and GTFS data and produce a full and compliant set of GTFS-ride files to do analysis and visualization, and also for intake into other applications. An example of that would be Remix, which is actually building visualizations of ridership with something that is based on GTFS right now. So we see that as an opportunity to increase the use. And as always, trying to involve other people and open to comments to try and make sure that GTFS-ride best support utility and implementability moving forward. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions or comments, my email is on this. Sorry, I need to advance this. It's on the screen. And also I mentioned the wiki. And so it's gtfs-ride.org. We keep that up to date as much as possible with progress in the project, as well as tools and the standard itself. So if you're interested in learning more about the standard, that's definitely the place to go. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. It's a good thing you're on the project team for G-18, and you can put that input, because there's definitely some relationship between what you're trying to do and G-18.
Absolutely.
So wanted to round things out before we get into the questions with a presentation from MobilityData. Carl Fredlund is here. He's a project manager for the public transportation elements. And I found out about MobilityData a couple of years ago from my friend Aaron Antrim, and thought it was very useful. It's not that well known within the industry, and I thought it would be useful, especially would fit right into this discussion about specifications and so forth, to at least give a high-level overview of what MobilityData is about and what they're trying to do. So Carl, why don't you take it away? You've got your unmuted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks for the invitation to give an overview of what we're doing. I think the organization is pretty young, so hopefully there's some of you who've heard of us already and some that are able to get a quick overview today. So basically, that's what I want to go over, is who we are and the work that we're doing around public transportation, so mostly on GTFS. So basically, as an organization, we have a vision of trying to make an open, even playing field for people trying to find information about how to get around with solo driving modes. So whether it's walking, cycling, carpooling, or using things like public transportation. We want it to be as easy, the data at least, to be there for people to build tools to make it as easy as possible for anybody who's looking to get around to use non-driving modes as it is to use driving modes. So we want to build up a system that allows for interoperability between transit systems. So in order to achieve that, we're talking to all different types of stakeholders and trying to come up with data formats, data infrastructure, practices, and tools to help everybody implement those things. Where the organization is a nonprofit organization with a member-driven organizational governance, and also a member and funder-driven roadmap. So it's an open community that we're trying to get members into to help us define the direction that we should go in making data standards for passenger information. It's an open community. So the specifications are governed by an open community, so you don't have to be a member. So things like GTFS, but we're also working on GBFS, which is a general bike share feed specification, and looking at other modes as well. And so we want those to be all governed in a similar way to GTFS. That's a very collaborative and consensus-based open community, allowing everybody to develop the standards and build them out according to their needs. So our principles are focusing on the traveler experience. So we're very much focused on passenger data in terms of transit. We're focused on diversity and inclusivity. We know that the work that we're doing is we're trying to capture the most essential needs of the industry, but we know that we're not able to capture everything in the standardizations that we're making. And exactly keeping everything open, so not only the data, but the community process and also the software that we're building, keeping it open source. And exactly, we're trying to build stuff that has interoperability so that between modes, it's easy to interact, or potentially even between things like operational data, like the previous panelists mentioned. And lastly, but absolutely not leastly, we need to prioritize individual privacy. So we don't want to be creating anything that is going to risk people's personal privacy about how they travel around. So onto the GTFS specification. I think probably almost everyone here is familiar with it. It's a data format that was introduced originally by Google some 15 years ago or so for helping agencies release their schedule data in a standardized format to be used in traveler-facing applications. So originally Google Maps, but also Apple Maps, Transit app, Move It, whatever it may be that people are using to get around. So what MobilityData has come together as an organization to do is try and build on that success of the standard and try and build it out to be able to cover more aspects of transit and also other modes of transportation. So I think probably a lot of people are familiar in the GTFS specification. There's both the GTFS schedule and the GTFS real-time specifications. And so the real-time is for live information on the vehicles, and the schedule is, or static is just that information on the schedule. And within each of those, then there's different extensions. So depending on the needs of the community, we might want to add something such as text-to-speech or ticketing rules or things like that. So that's all the stuff that gets talked together by the community that we're trying to facilitate the discussions on. But in the end, the core place that is happening is on the GTFS GitHub. So our work, we prioritize our work based on the industry needs and our membership needs, our members' needs. So we try and prioritize the feedback that is coming from our members specifically, but also from the industry at large. And here's an example of one of the specification extensions we've recently worked on for GTFS, which is GTFS pathways. Originally, we were trying to describe a route that a wheelchair user would use to travel through a station to be able to get to their train or bus. And so that was built using this process that we have of engaging the community and collecting the needs. And then there's the voting process, which has long existed in GTFS that we're not doing anything to change. So that is constant for anyone who's been aware of that. This standard is interesting because we had originally designed it for I had in mind the use case of the wheelchair user. And actually some of the places where it's been applied has been slightly different. So one case of a early adopter of this is a application called NaviLens, and the Transportation Authority in Barcelona in Catalonia. And they are using the data to be able to build an app for people who are visually impaired to be able to navigate through the station and find their way. So it's just one example of how we would build out the spec to include something new to meet a need. And then on the tools side, we're also building several different things to try and help make it easier for people to use GTFS and to improve the quality of the GTFS that they're releasing. So we have a variety of different materials. So we have a resource center, which is update to a lot of different resources that were out there already that is describing the best practices and has the actual specification description in it. We also build validation tools, like the screenshot here you can see is a GTFS validator that, again, there have been some that have existed in the past, but we're trying to build an updated version that we can maintain into the future. There's a mobility database to help allow discoverability of all the different GTFS feeds that exist. And eventually we want to expand that beyond GTFS to other modes of transportation as well. And then openmobilitydata.org, which is a repository where the feeds can actually live and get updated. Yeah, so if anyone is interested, we'd love to have you participate. So membership is something that we're really excited to be building up as a young organization. There's different levels of membership depending on if you're a private or public entity. And also we have the option of funding a roadmap with us. So if there's a specific project that your agency or your company is really looking to get done, we basically are open to working on a contract-based way of accelerating that so that we can focus more of our time on it. And same thing goes with proposing a working group. That's also something that can be really interesting if there's a group of people in the industry that see a specific need that they want to get attention to. We're really happy to try and lead some of those discussions. Cool, so that's basically mobility data in a nutshell. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. It's Carl@MobilityData, or you can email Marla, who's our partnerships and community person for North America. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Carl. That's great. At least gives, I'm sure that creates some awareness for people who may not have known about mobility data. I really like the part about I like the extensions, but that's sort of the future and that's a slow process. But the best practices, I thought, was really something useful too. It really should be out there because people apply GTFS in all sorts of different ways. So we've got some time for questions. Maybe we'll start with, there's sort of a couple aimed more at Cecilia, I guess. It has to do with, I guess, how it's difficult to develop standards, and the panel had a big discussion. We're not developing a standard. We're talking about specifications and management framework, but it's clear that it's very hard to get specifications and standards to be adopted. There was a one on demand responsive transit just TCRP came out with just last year, I believe, and it's a hard sell. Do you have any? I know it's early in the project, but do you have any thoughts about what would make it successful in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of, I don't think there's like one answer to how it's going to be successful. I mean, one thing we're trying to do is to get a lot of buy-in so that it doesn't feel like a totally top-down process, and getting, having the workshop, and just like, I think the panel has kind of said that we don't want this to be a totally secret TCRP process that nobody hears about. So, trying to just report out and give progress updates to the community and get feedback. I think that's one thing. And I mean, I think the whole issue with effort and, agency staff is a big challenge. And obviously it's helpful if the vendors are involved and are able to actually produce data already meeting the specification, so that it's not up to the transit agencies to try to convert data that they're getting from a vendor. I think, the vendors we've talked to so far have kind of said that they'll do that if the customer requires it,
Yeah.
which is obviously a long-term solution, because agencies aren't going out and putting out RFPs to ITS vendors every day. So that's a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, I think the other thing we heard about was just like trying to really identify a targeted benefit that might be a specific use case, or and kind of focusing on that, but
Yeah.
it doesn't get around the effort.
No. I mean, GTFS was, successful in large part because it was focusing on something very specific that everybody immediately had a home. The use case would help. I understand the challenges. I've been involved in these kinds of efforts before. I personally think the first part about just gathering information and explaining about, a framework and what kinds of issues that people struggle with and how this informs how they're going to set up things, from my point of view, is going to be just as valuable as whatever the outcome of phase 2 is. So that sort of thing. Let me ask a question to David. What's the relationship between GTFS-ride and NTD, or whatever standardized ridership data? Or I assume Oregon State DOT is involved in this because I mean, they want to get a consistent reporting process of some sort, but I'm not quite sure I understand the the relationship between the two.
Right. So let me try to answer the question by separating those two. I think the interest or the motivation for the project from the perspective of the Oregon DOT was just simply to increase the availability of more consistent and higher quality ridership data.
Okay.
It's amazing when you have these conversations and do that with people in the, I guess, in the industry. The perception is that exists in large amounts and you can just grab it and use it. But the reality is that it's available in different levels of aggregation with different levels of accuracy. And so I think that's where part of the problem is. Now, in relation to your question about Ntd reporting, for example, in our conversations with transit agencies, we've heard from them the potential connection between that activity reporting and GTFS-ride, and that it could possibly simplify the process. But that's a lead that we haven't really followed to a great extent, because there are too many factors involved. But it could possibly have a benefit, especially for smaller agencies.
Okay, but that wasn't the main motivation. I was okay. That's good. That's good to understand. I guess it's also to try to encourage more open data of making it available to the public, but making it consistent across different transit systems, so there's not variations in quality.
Correct.
Yeah. Good. Okay, I've got a question for Carl. How do you create the balance act between data openness and individual privacy?
Yeah, I think this is something that we're coming up against more and more as a specification becomes, the functionality gets built out. So there's a few things that we're talking about now, like there's talk about GOFS, which is the General On-Demand Feed Specification, which would be used for things like taxis, rideshare, or microtransit. And that's where you start to actually have then individualized data where you can really see it wasn't somebody who pinged at some point to get a full set of schedules. This is someone you have actual information about where they are and where they're going. And so I think that's where we haven't had those discussions yet necessarily, but we're definitely thinking already, how do we have this data and make sure that it stays aggregated so that it's not exposing information about any one individual. And the other thing that really helps us in this is the fact that we've kept all of the standards that we're working on as open as possible. So we have a lot of people in the community that are very focused on creating an open ecosystem, and they are well versed in these things, so they can help us help flag anything that they think might be problematic.
Okay, good. No, that's going to be an increasing challenge because we've always wanted to have a relationship between, or be able to relate, you know, performance data to experience data, but it's really hard to protect privacy and get experience data. And this is the same sort of issues you're dealing with. Cecilia, I have another sort of question. I'm sort of riffing a little bit off of one of these, but the automated systems that produce the data, and I've sort of mentioned that in the comments with Nigel, that, you know, there's problems about corrupt data, missing data, bad data. Did that come up in some of your conversations, and how is that going to be? Any thoughts? I mean, I know again it's very early, but any thoughts about how are you going to deal with that, because that's an ongoing challenge for everybody?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I would say a major challenge, especially with the APC and ABL systems, that, you know, the APC systems have to be calibrated, and if they're not, you get all kinds of things. So a lot of transit agencies did kind of bring that up, that they, you know, there's usually many levels of cleaning. The vendors sometimes do some cleaning themselves, and then the agencies tend to have their own processes as well to try to identify problems, fill in gaps, or, you know, just say this day has too much missing data and we're not going to use it. And so it seems like there are kind of a lot of customized processes there. And I guess the question is, if there is a specification for how the data is coming in, does that allow transit agencies to actually share the tools that are cleaning that data? So I think there's some potential that ultimately transit agencies can get cleaner data with less effort if they're all you know, using data in a similar format.
That's the hope.
That's the hope, you know.
Yeah. I don't know, Catherine, do you have any reactions or thoughts? Because your presentation this morning was talking about the 7 types of AVL data.
Yeah, the data cleaning is definitely going to be a significant effort, but you know, I think kind of knowing what you're trying to get to, you know, having a format you're trying to put it into, and then being able to, you know, I think if you can have standard formats, that the tools for validating and cleaning your data will hopefully emerge, that you'll be able to, you know, throw your data into a visualization tool or something that'll say like, hey, this is good, this is bad. Some of those things may be a consequence of this, as well as part of the process with data on the data cleaning side. But it's definitely a challenge, as we've heard throughout the last couple of days.
Yeah, and that's true, and that's sort of back to my point, and also what you know, Cecilia was saying. You know, that's why we wanted to put this into the symposium. That's why, you know, just having these discussions, you know, I mean, people that are part of the symposium tend to be the advanced thinkers of all this. So it's going to take a lot of effort, given how long it's taken just to get a conversation going at all about using data within the industry in a significant way. All of this is going to take a very long time. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. It's been a long day. We still have a significant number of people who are online. So that's fantastic. And I'll just remind people that there is another fantastic tour that Amherst students put together tomorrow morning before the actual start of the program at 9 o'clock. The before program, I think, is at 8:30, if I remember correctly. So Willem, that's correct, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah.
That's correct. Okay. I thank you all. Thank the panelists for their presentations and getting this discussion going. Thank you for the questions and answers. We'll pass those on to the panelists as well, so that they can ponder those as part of their own projects. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
If they're